Welcome to your community. This is your hometown. This is Walton Entertainment. This is where you can hear from the community and those making a difference. We explore topics, local festivals, arts and entertainment, and local news. For this program and much more, visit us online at yourlocalstream.com. That's yourlocalstream.com.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Brown. I'm the historian with Monroe Museum, and on behalf of the Monroe Museum, I'd like to welcome y'all here today for this event. I'd like to take a moment before we move to the main event and put in a plug for the museum and mention a couple of things. We are open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4, and this is our 10th anniversary this year. We started trying to put the museum together in 2013, and here we are 10 years later. And if you haven't been down there, you should be ashamed. I've known Larry for quite a while, probably not as long as some of you, but he calls himself the professor of useless knowledge. I found very little about what he knows to be useless. He's forgotten more history than I'll ever know. He's helped us in so many ways at the museum. If you go, and first thing you see when you walk in the door is the E.M. Carnes exhibit, and every bit of that is Larry. He's given us access to every photograph he has, and actually a couple of months ago gave us all the equipment. We've got pretty much a room full of photographic equipment, most of which is over 100 years old, that a lot of museums would give a lot of money to have, and that all goes to him. And I was going to mention that as soon as Faye can come up with a decent picture of him, we're going to dedicate that Carnes exhibit to him and put his picture up there, and that's entirely appropriate to do that. It's what he's done for us. And so at this time, I'm going to be quiet. It's not an easy thing for me to do, but and let Mr. Larry Witcher, the professor of useless knowledge, tell you some of that knowledge that he has. Larry?
Well, I'm glad to see everybody here. I said don't tell nothing but the truth, so I enjoyed being here. But what it is, that the title of the professor of useless knowledge, I'm going to just tell you how that happened. But I can't tell you the story because they said come up here, Mr. Brown. I stepped out in front of our car one day, and Faye was driving. She stopped, and he looked in the window and said, I want you at the courthouse on the 8th day of January and do an hour talk. I said, about what? And he said, anything. Then I seen it advertisement on Facebook that said I was going to tell you about the old Monroe, how the history of Monroe was saved through the camera lens of Mr. E.M. Carnes, and all of that equipment, as he said, was in the museum. Now, I have always picked up stuff from Monroe for a long time. If it had Monroe written on it, fountain pens, postcards, letters, anything from Monroe. And so I'm going to try to tell you a thing I see right now. When I worked on this week, that I wouldn't have time to cover everything that he said I was going to cover. We'll have to have one or two more of these meetings, or you'll have to come to the house and I'll give it to you one-on-one. But I guess the first thing I need to do is say that where I got the stuff, I have picked up anything I could from Monroe. He's seen something today for his first time with a little 1914 pocket guide to the business district of the city of Monroe, put out by the Bank of Monroe. The Bank of Monroe is now Synovus Bank. They were located right across the street. Then they moved up to the corner of the street. Then they changed from the Bank of Monroe to the National Bank. Then another little book that he hadn't seen, but his wife's mother worked either in this building or one close to it. I think she worked in the building, the telephone company of Monroe, 1915. The little building right across the street from here, the white building on this north side. It's a white stucco building now that has Edward Jones Investment Company in it. But that building had some of the prettiest brickwork of any building in Monroe. But as it says, everything changes. Apparently they knocked off the pretty brickwork and stuccoed it and painted it white. But that's where the telephone company started out. Then it moved over to Highland Avenue. Most of you know where that is now, but when William Smith Funeral Home moved off of the Broad Street where the Episcopal Church is, they moved into a resident building up on Highland Avenue. Then it was tore down and they built a telephone company there. Now the main office of the telephone company is up on the Winder Highway almost at the county line. And that building, but the telephone building is still on Highland. Now we're not going to talk about many buildings today because I got to tell how Monroe's history was saved. That's going to take a lot of time. I said I'd tell you how the Professor of Useless Knowledge title come in. I don't mind being called Mr. Know-It-All. A lot of folks, when they call the know-it-all, they get all upset. But it don't bother me. So if y'all want to call me Mr. Know-It-All, it'll be just fine. But anyway, I called a radio station 21 years ago, never intended to talk on the radio, and told them that they were talking about how ugly the possum is. I called to defend the possum. The possum has saved this country twice already. That's a story, I guess. It takes about 15 minutes to tell it, but it's all factual. It may not be truthful, but it's factual. But today, I think what we're going to do to start with, now I've got a few notes here, and the notes is because of a problem I had. Somebody asked me a while ago why the walking cane. Now when I come to Monroe in 1953, we moved up here, me, my mom, my dad, my brother and sister. We moved from Turkey Mountain Trail up to Monroe. Now I was already up here a year earlier, in school. But we moved up here into Monroe when Daddy gave up farming and went to being a barber full time. That's a good story there, where his first haircut took 2 days to do it. But I won't have time to do that one today. He cut his brother's hair. At dinner time, he started it one day, and his daddy said it's time to go back to the field, so he left my uncle with a half a haircut until the next day. Then he finished his haircut. That was his first one. We moved into Monroe 1953. I graduated in 54. I'm going to fast forward up to 66 rather, when I started working with the city of Monroe. I started with the city of Monroe when Edward Ellis was mayor. The next mayor was James Matthews. We claimed to be cousins somehow down the line. But I started as a city building inspector. Louise McKissick was the city clerk. When Louise retired, James Matthews got me appointed as temporary acting city clerk. Now if you got to sign a paper, the city had to have a city clerk. You can't do without one, so when you sign a paper on the bottom line, the temporary acting city clerk, it takes a whole line. But then the city administrator's position was created, and I got appointed that too. So at one time, I was a building inspector, the city clerk, and the city administrator, the first one Monroe ever had. Therefore, I touched somebody all the time in the city. Everybody knew who I was, and I worked as a city administrator, city clerk, and building inspector until Walt Harbor, the councilman, came to me one day and said, "I need to talk to you." He being a councilman, he was one of my bosses, so I had to let him talk to me. He said, "I'm going to make a motion. Next meeting, you'll be taking minutes to fire you." He said, "Because you got too many jobs. You're not doing a good job in either one, and anybody with any sense would know that." So at the next meeting held, he did that motion. Now, Dr. James Matthews, he was an optometrist, or at least worked on the eyes, until I looked down one day when he was checking me, and I said, "Dr. Matthews, you got on 2 colors of shoes." And he was trying to fix me where I could see better, and he had on a blue shoe and a black shoe. And he said, "Well, that's okay, I got another pair at home just like it." But he got me appointed, and if y'all remember how Matthews talked at the council meeting, when we get through with the meeting, he said, "Well, now, has anybody else got anything to say?" Walton Harbor said, "Yeah, I make a motion to fire Larry." Well, for the lack of a second, he said, "I'll rephrase it. I'll make a motion to take 2 jobs away from him if you're not going to fire him." No second on that. So he said, "I'll redo it again then." He said, "And let him pick the job." Well, that suited everybody, because after a lengthy discussions of which job each one wanted me to take, the mayor finally agreed. We got a motion to let me pick the job, and I said, "Well, I am not qualified as a city administrator. I'm not qualified even as a clerk." Of course, Matthews said, "But you've been doing such a good job." I said, "But I'm still not qualified. I'll go back to the building inspector." So I worked for the city. Now, I brought that in. That brings me into a man who came to Monroe named E.M. Carnes, is what he liked to be called, from Cartersville, Georgia. He came down here in a buggy with some equipment, photography equipment, in the back of the buggy. This was in 1900. Somewhere I've heard the date 1902, but I couldn't find the evidence to support it. So one place said he came in the turn of the century at 1900. Came from Cartersville in the buggy and was going to stay in Monroe 3 to 4 months, then go to Florida. He's going to see the world through the lens of his camera. Well, with the 3 positions, somehow or another, I would always be called when the water, light, and gas department was trimming the tree in front of the Carnes house. The Carnes house at that time was at the corner of Church Street and South Broad. The White House is still standing in front of the old post office. That's where Mr. Carnes and his wife bought that house in 1908. They moved. Their first location for his studio was on Court Street, which is a street right next to us here. And he bought that house. It was perfect for what he wanted, because it was fixed for business downstairs, residence upstairs. He took the upstairs and made his studio on it, and they lived downstairs. So that's how Mr. Carnes got there. And there, when we'll fast forward up to 83, Bob Malcolm with Malcolm Realty was in there. Now M&M Realty, Malcolm and Malcolm is there. Bob Malcolm's I don't know what they even related or not, but Bob Malcolm was there in '83. While Miss Carnes was still living there, she would call me and say, the folks is in this tree again, come up and get them out. So I would walk up there, give them time to cut what few limbs they were going to cut, and tell them they'd done cut enough, and she took a liking to me. And while she was there, I got the opportunity of going under the house. And when I went under the house, there was a stack of pictures, probably 20, 30 pictures, and a truckload of negatives and camera equipment in boxes and wood boxes and pasteboard boxes under the house. So I said that was for shoot somewhere around '68. Then we fast forwarded all the way to '83 when Bob Malcolm lived there. That's when they put the house up for sale. When Bob Malcolm's realty office was there, they put the house up for sale. They had 2 daughters. They stayed married for 53 years. Mr. Carnes died in '57. Now, if he was 20 years old, is what the history on him was, that he came to Monroe, and he died in '57, that meant he was about 77 years old. Now, if they were married for 53 years, that only leaves 24 years, so somewhere within the first couple of years, Mr. Carnes met a woman named Ossie Parker. The love bugs were swarming that year bad, and he got bit and she got bit too. So they wound up getting married. And he never made it to Florida except on vacations. He did go to Florida on vacation. He made pictures of everything he could make in Monroe, made pictures of this courthouse from every direction. He made pictures from the top of the courthouse from every direction. I don't know how in the world he got all of the equipment up there with the cameras that he used to make the picture with. I've been on the courthouse, I think, 3 times. Steve's been on the courthouse several times, and it's not a good feeling up on there, because that thing that looks huge here when you get up there, it's only about that wide. I was up there in '66, the last time they remodeled the courthouse. Took me about 15 minutes to drag my camera and stuff up to the top of the courthouse. And I looked down, and there my wife was standing on the ground with a man hugging her. Takes 15 seconds to get back down. After all of that, it turned out to be her cousin. So I had to climb back uphill, start all over with the pictures that I was making. I was making the same pictures that Steve made, that Carnes made in 1907. So he lived here in this town making pictures of everything that he could make pictures of. Churches, public buildings, every event. He made pictures of all the Civil War soldiers that were still alive in 1916. He made pictures of all the World War II soldiers that came back to town on glass negatives. And I found out then a lot of Carnes' negatives was glass, a lot of them was plastic. I figured the glass negatives was the oldest pictures, but I found out different. During World War II, the government got all the plastic, so photographers went back to glass. Most all of his soldier boys, local soldiers, was made on glass negatives. I still have those that I'm going to let the museum have them now, because I look through them and I don't see any of them that I need, because I don't know any of them. That was the biggest problem with Mr. Carnes. He didn't keep records. Just like you out here, when y'all make a picture, not a single one of you dates the back of every picture and writes who's on it. I've got hundreds of pictures. I have no idea whether I'm kin to them or whether I dated them. Because nobody wrote anything on them. And we're still doing that. My wife pulled out pictures not long ago. We couldn't sleep at night on the bed because she still had it covered up with pictures. No names, no nothing, no dates on anything. But she knows who they are. And she's still here, but when she ain't here, my daughter is not going to have any idea whether we kin to them or not. But that's the same thing Carnes did. We all just alike. Well, in '83, when I found all this, I found out that Carnes had two daughters, one named Devera, who married Charles Neal, one named Thelma, married Heath, Lester Heath. Now Lester Heath, I don't know anything about Charles Neal, but Lester Heath was a snake handler. He went around the schools and showed poisonous snakes, would milk them for the kids to see them. His daughter, Thelma Heath, his wife, Thelma Heath, we met, we talked to her. She said that one day I said, how did he keep the snakes where he wanted them? She said he kept the snakes cold. But one day on the stage, he dropped a sack and it was under a light. The snake got warm and crawled out. The same man that, like Mr. Brown that introduced me, said, y'all be calm now, be calm. Said Colonel Heath was the name he went by, had everything under control. His wife said, and I quote her, Colonel Heath didn't even have his bowels under control. So the way I met her is I called her sister Devera in '83 when they put the house up for sale. And I told her who I was as easy as you could say, said, while trespassing under your mama's house, I found these pictures. I didn't know where she was going to slam the phone down or what, but she talked to me. I said, and I didn't want to see them destroyed. I said, I've known your mama. Your daddy died in '57. Knew your mama. Told her about the tree story. And she said, are you calling long distance? I said, yes. I'm calling long distance. She said, well, you need to talk to my sister, Devera, Thelma. Talk to my sister, Thelma. She lives in Kentucky. Now, I thought Kentucky was longer long distance than Atlanta was. But she said, but she's in Monroe now. At the time this book was put out, you could call Atlanta and talk 3 minutes for 35 cents. That was the charge to call Atlanta. But it cost a little more than that when I called Devera in Atlanta. But she said, Thelma is in the Monroe house now. And if you go over there, knock on the door, she will not hear you because she can't hear anything. Said, and if she does hear you, she is not going to let you in because you're a man. So I went over anyway and knocked on the door, and sure enough, Devera was right. She either didn't hear me or she wasn't going to let me in. So I came back, and my wife sitting on the front row, the pretty one with white hair. There's two on there with white hair, but she's the pretty one. That's her sister, the other one. My wife is the other. My sister's the other one. But I went over there anyway, and after 5 o'clock, I said, maybe she's gone somewhere and be home when town closes. I carried my wife with me, Faith, Miss Faith. I knocked on the door unmercifully. I beat the wall, I beat the door, I beat the glass. Finally, a little curtain moved on the door. Faye standing in front of the door like this, because I couldn't see inside because it was dark. Well, when the door opened, I used the old salesman trick of putting my foot in it. And I told Thelma the same thing I told Devera, that while under the house, I told her the tree story. She said, well, you did see my mama, because that's exactly what she would have said. So we were invited in. Faye and I went in, and I told her that I got some pictures while her mother was still alive, while her mother still lived there. And I did not want to see the others destroyed. She slid out on the edge of her seat, And she said, what are you going to do with the pictures you got when Mama was here? I thought she was going to say, bring them back. I said, well, I've shown them to a lot of people, and I want to show them. I'd like to put them, have them placed. We didn't have no museum to put them, but put them where people could see them and have showings of the pictures. She said, come back tomorrow. So we left and come back tomorrow. So she said, I talked to DeVera, and she said, have y'all ever had any alfalfa tea? Now let me catch you up on this now. Hesitated there. 2 years ago, the 25th of next month, I had a stroke. And it took away part of my talking. Every once in a while on the radio station, you call it dead air. I'll lose my voice for 3-4 seconds, but it'll come back. Also, my wife said I wasn't but a half a man that she married. I have no hearing in my right ear, no sight in my right eye, and my right foot don't work right, so she said I'm just half a man. But I was well blessed to recover what I did when I had that stroke. So if I hesitate a few seconds, it'll come to me. But we hadn't even one had any alfalfa tea. If any of y'all are farmers know what alfalfa smells like, it tastes just like it smells. It's hay for cows, horses, and such. So she left and brought us a cup of alfalfa tea, 3 cups of tea. She sat there and was drinking it and smiling. I was drinking it and slow as I could, and Faye was gagging. But she said it's healthy. Well, I couldn't argue with her. She was 84 years old and drove from Kentucky down here by herself and was staying there. So I had a cup of alfalfa tea, and Miss Thelma gets up again, leaves the room, and my wife loves me so much, she poured her cup in my cup, and I had 2 cups of alfalfa tea. That's probably what brought me through the stroke so well. But we drank that alfalfa tea, and she said, I talked to DeVera, and she said, why not, that you were probably the answer to a prayer, that we had wondered what to do with the stuff. We had always wanted it shown, Papa's stuff shown, but we didn't know how to do it. And if you're going to show it, DeVera said, why don't you give him all of Papa's stuff? So that's how it got started, but then we had to come back one more day, because she's going to talk to DeVera tonight. So we went home and come back one more time. And she said, DeVera said, give you everything. But that's as close as we can get to getting somebody to show it. Well, I was going to take it to my house. 5 truckloads later, I had it all at my house. 5 truckloads last year, Mike Cash loaded it in his truck 5 times and brought it to the museum. Hopefully someday they'll get enough area that we can set up a room like that would have the cameras and everything in it. By then they can do whatever they want to with it, the museum can. I don't know all of the members of the museum, but what they have done is wonderful. The only one I really know is Steve Brown, who for a while I didn't know whether he lived at my house or his house. They would come over and look at the stuff. And I have an image in my mind now that I need to get rid of. I'll tell you about it shortly. But I wound up getting all of Papa's cameras, all of his negatives. Faye and I built a dark room. Anybody remember Travis Ellison? Probably the hardest fellow in the world to work with. I actually worked with Travis Ellison. Because when I got all of these negatives, I didn't know what to do with them. So I asked Travis about it, and he didn't seem too interested, said he was fixing to give up photography, that he couldn't tote his stuff anymore. Said, I can't tote it, so I'm quitting. I said, well, Travis, if you want somebody to tote your stuff for you, I'll tote it. He said, no, if I can't do it myself, I ain't gonna fool with it. I'm quitting. He quit about 30 times that I knew him. But he called me in about 3 days and said, I got a job to shoot. Was you serious about toting me equipment? And I said, yeah, it was. So Travis showed me how to develop the negatives from a negative to a picture, from the film to the negative, he showed me. So Faye and I worked with Travis for 2 or 3 years, and that's how I learned how to process the pictures from the negative to the picture. See, Mr. Carnes used some negatives that were 8 by 10 inches big, like in a studio camera that's down at the museum now. There's another unusual camera down there that was sitting low on the floor the last time I was in there, with a picture over 40 inches long in front of it, which is the A&M class graduation, A&M school above Monroe. He made our picture, school picture. One thing Mr. Carnes did, have a girl on the left and a girl on the right. The reason he did that, they are pictures that had boys on the left with the same boys on the right. The camera was a panoramic camera that actually turned. You loaded the film in the camera turned from right to left. The film inside turned from left to right, and it was an open slit that the camera exposed the film in, and as the camera turned, the film turned, and it made a picture. There was 3 strings wrapped around a stick in the camera box when I opened it. I had no idea what those strings was until I got to playing with the camera. When you line up people 50 or 100 long, the man on the left and the man on the right is farther from the camera than the man in the middle. But if you stand them all in a half circle, they're all the same distance from the camera. So that's what he would do, is draw a line on the ground, and everybody would either sit on there or stand on it. And he turned the camera on, and it started its turning, the film turned in the other direction. At the end of it, he had everybody in focus, and everybody was equal size. But the railroad track in front of Carwood Plant No. 1, where my wife worked, the railroad track is curved because it was straight when he made the picture, but this end and this end and the middle was different, so the train track is curved. Everybody looks at that picture and says, I didn't know that train turned around. It did turn around when it came from Gainesville. Monroe had 3 trains serving the city. One from Gainesville to Monroe Depot on Davis Street. One from Social Circle to the same depot on Davis Street. One from Greene County Railroad came from Appalachia through Boston, through Good Hope to Monroe. We had 3 trains. The Greene County Railroad Depot was on the corner of Davis and Madison, where the antique store is now. That was not the building. It was in kind of like a little residential building, but we had 3 trains at one time. All of that was recorded by Mr. Carnes. So we have that history that we would not have had it not been for the love bug that bit him when he come through Monroe. And he married Ossie Parker. And they had 2 daughters, Devira and Thelma. They had a total of 4 children. of 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Before they died, he got to see those. And that's about all on Mr. Carnes, unless y'all have something that you would like to question. I'll try to answer it. So we need to establish the county seat was one of the problems that our early people had. Cow pens, about 3 miles southeast of here, was here at that time. Judge Dooley held the first courts in Walton County in some barns at cow pens. It was 3 words at that time, the cow pen. A man named Richard Easley from Athens, Watkinsville area owned a lot of land down around cow pens. He'd already built cattle barns, shelters, pens, and he called it the cow pen. That was his identification. He rented land everywhere and raised cows. Well, cow pens had a lawyer and a judge already living there, a lawyer and a doctor. Spring Place is where we are now, is in Spring Place. It was not Monroe at that time. They had a doctor and a lawyer also living here. Each one of the doctors and lawyers thought this or that would be the county seat. Everybody wanted to be in the county seat. Cow pens was developing a little faster than Spring Place was, so they called the courts in the 1820s, and one of their jobs was to establish a county seat. They also tried a man for stealing hogs and several for selling non-tax paid liquor, and one man for murder. But one of their jobs, the inferior court ran it, was to establish a county seat for Walton County. Walton was established in 1818, the county's was. December 15th, 1818, the county was laid out. Also, one other very important thing took place on December 15th. My wife was born then. But she wasn't born in 1818, she just looks like that. No, she don't, she's prettier than I am. But that's how the county, this man named Richard Easley owned the cow pens, a lot of property there, and had the shelters and barns that they held court in. And they were favored cow pens to be the county seat of Walton. Walton County was the 46th county in Georgia. Georgia has 159 counties, second only to Texas. Texas has 254. So if it wasn't for Texas, we'd have more counties than anybody else in the state. But we have 159 counties. So cow pens was being favored. They had the argument down there as cow pens or Spring Place, and cow pens was being favored, so we would have all been cowpenians had they got that. But a man named Richard Easley had that property down there, and Elisha Betts, he was transported down here from Virginia. So he stood, Mr. Elisha Betts, Richard Easley. I get Richard and Elisha mixed up several times when I tell this story. Elisha Betts was come in from Virginia. When Richard Easley was arguing for the cow pens to be the county seat, and it seemed favored, Richard stood up and then made his proposal, Then Mr. Betts stood and said, I have just bought 250 acres of high dry land 3 miles from here, level land, he said. If you make Spring Place the county seat, change the name to Monroe in honor of James Monroe, I will give enough land for public buildings, which you're setting in the land, on top of the land in the building, enough land for both public and private cemeteries. I've never figured out what the difference in a public and a private cemetery was. And enough 6 acres around Spring Place, which is down where our permanent power station is now on Spring Street, and every other lot of a 50-acre tract to sell and make money to build the public buildings. Everybody voted for Spring Place to become the county seat, changed the name to Monroe, except one man, Mr. David Malcolm. He owned a lot of property in that area, so he voted against it. But the majority took Hope, and Monroe became the county seat.
So today you guys get to come to church and see me play with about 180 pounds of ice. For some of you that I don't know personally, my name is Glenn Hughes. I am the proud son-in-law of Lynn and Buddy Goins, grandson of Bob and Dixie Franklin, who were members here some years ago, and proud son of Teresa and Buzzy Hughes of this area. My family's been going to this church for 10 years, a little bit over 10 years now. I found that out recently when I had to get Pastor Todd to fill out some paperwork for me. It was a shock that it's been that long because it still feels so new being at the church with a great family. So today, not only am I going to carve ice, but I'm going to tell you kind of a story of the evolution of my new path in faith. For some of you that don't know, I have recently started going to seminary at New Orleans Baptist. I was called last year to move away from my career in ICE to moving into seminary, and possibly one day being an associate pastor, so I have a little less responsibility than the main pastor, but still able to lead and shape a congregation. So today, just so my back wasn't broke, I didn't bring a 300-pound block of ice. I brought a 150-pound block of ice. So I did this intentionally. This block of ice is not completely clear. It has some imperfections, kind of like us as Christians. I brought this on purpose. Normally what I sell is crystal clear. There's no imperfections, but what would Christianity be without imperfections? That's what my life has been. From an early age, I chose Christianity not by my parents, but kind of for my own purposes. I went to church about 2 miles from my house and decided I wanted to go to a church that wasn't the church my parents went to, so I could learn to be a Christian on my own. That was my first step in Christianity, was accepting Christ at 12. I accepted Christ at the age of 6, but not knowing what truly accepting Christ was. I still had imperfections. I still had doubts. When I was 12 to 13 years old and joined Alcovey Mountain Baptist in Jersey, Georgia, I decided that Christ was the way for me to make my life better. So, just like my journey, it has to have a starting point. So my sculpture will have a starting point, and that's going to be the design. That design is the plan that God laid out for me from the day of conception. May not look like much, but at this point, it is just simply marked. My journey started in culinary school back in 2001. I met a girl in high school who told me she wouldn't marry me unless I went to college. Her parents agreed. We are still married, so apparently I went to college. My first hat I ever wore, chef's hat. I learned quickly what I needed to do to prepare myself for the real world, and that was finding something I was passionate about. Well, for this journey, I'm going to simply take a couple tools, make a few cuts, and we'll continue our journey a little bit at a time. All right, so all the tools I'm using, yes, they are regular tools. They're not waterproof. I have never been electrocuted. This is really ice, so yes, it melts. These are questions I get asked daily. So I just figured I'd give you guys a couple quick answers, so maybe to avoid some awkward questions later. So can anybody tell what I'm going to carve? Maybe not a mountain. I'm going for a humpback whale. We'll see if I can pull it off. Not really a humpback whale, but we'll see how it evolves. I'm trying not to make too much of a mess because apparently I have to clean it up. I don't understand why. All right, so for the first thing we do is take away something. By the way, if you're in the front row, you are in the splash zone. I don't make any promises, but I do promise to try to get people in the back row too. No, that would probably be the only snowball I throw. Maybe. is, I truly feel, is my calling. So, as me as a Christian, I am rough. This is my roughness. One of the things that we're allowed to do is grow in Christ. So, I'm going to bring out something that is not so rough. Something that I got to take a lot of time on and has been patiently waiting. And this does weigh an additional 150 pounds, so I didn't cheat you guys with the weight. So, can anybody tell what it is? No? There we go. She said it in the front row. Jesus. This is who we can glorify. Through our faiths, things may not be clear at all times. But God has given us the chance and the tools to find Him. Those tools are our Bible, prayer. For me, quite a few more classes, and a great mentor, and the Rev. But sometimes all it takes is a little heat or pressure for things to become more into a better view. So here we have an iconic symbol.
We also have entertainment. That day, a young lady will be singing love songs I requested from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but she's a good bit younger.
Hey everybody, it's Isaac over at Reboot giving you the Reboot Tech Tip. I want to talk a little bit today about video conferencing. I know that thing has gotten so big, because of the whole virus thing. I know people have seen things about Zoom, and how people are hacking Zoom and all that stuff. And for y'all that don't know, Zoom is basically a video conferencing software where, you can have up to I don't know what it is, 5,000 people on one video conference call or something crazy like that. But anyway, so a lot of people are using that to meet, a lot of organizations, so everybody can stay home and meet and stuff like that. So just give you a little info about that. Yes, Zoom was kind of hackable in the beginning and people were a little scared about it, but as far as I know, they have fixed those issues, and so it's pretty safe now. I tell people all the time, if you're on the internet, somebody can hack you. That's really just the bottom line. So as far as it can be safe, I think it is. Zoom is a good one. It's free if you want to do meetings for up to 40 minutes. But then after that, you have to pay for it. And I want to say it's like $15 a month or something like that. But the Zoom one is great. It has great quality. The sound is good. The video is good. All that stuff. So another one that people have been using is called Google Duos is another one, or Google Meets, and those both can be free if you have a Gmail account. As long as everybody participating has a Gmail account or a Google account, that's a free one. That's a good one. And the stuff we had before, like the FaceTime that people use for Apple products, is great. Skype is probably one of the more glitchier ones. Sometimes it works good, sometimes it doesn't. Some devices it works on, some it doesn't. It's really kind of a pain, so we don't really recommend that one. But and then some folks get scared about, can, after I hang up, can people still see me on my webcam and all that stuff? And once you cut the connection or hit leave the meeting, then you're done. But if you want to, I see a lot of people, they'll put like a piece of tape or something over the webcam, stuff like that, or you can unplug your webcam or turn it off inside the computer, whatever you want to do if that makes you feel a little safe. But yeah, new world, so people might want to get used to the video conferencing thing. Obviously if you got any questions, contact your local IT guy or give us a call here at Reboot. We'll be happy to help you. But that's it. Isaac at Reboot giving you the tech tip.
Yet how much of life are we willing to miss out on? Untreated hearing loss affects our mobility, It increases the risk of falls by 50%. Good hearing health is essential to staying engaged and doing what we love. Hear well and stay vital. Get a hearing health check every year.